very simple program that we're using to print out a table of square roots.
How come every time I come home you got something to say? Like where you been, where'd you go, never how was your day? Right when I walk through the door, yeah, you all in my face. If this is court, not guilty, why you all in my case? Need to stop believing your girls, believe in my word. Half the stories that they feed into you so absurd. So don't believe in everything your earlobe captures. You're forcing me to close the book and end this chapter. Now the power we empower, okay, so such a nice feel. I thank the powers of heaven for such a nice deal. An angel in exchange for the word of my love. So I can't go with you without your kisses and hugs. Need your touches and rubs, need your cuddles and snugs. I need you soaking with me in the bubbles and tub. But then when I gotta go alone, you go out. And I'll make sure that you see my baby girl smile.
I know you got concerns about what I did. For sure it's hard to learn, but yo, we still kids trying to find a way to grow in each other's eyes. Some days we hurt each other just trying to cover lies. But besides that, I realized back when we began, see, you was my woman, but still my friend, and that meant more to me than I really gave in. Cause that's the kind of love that's simply not a trend.
Being the play in the game, I can tell you how I feel. They're the ones that's playing games, I'm the ones that keep it real. Chicken heads trying to claim, now I got a deal. So I can't be slipping like I'm stepping on banana peels. But I keep amazed, most of the time we wanna be at ease. The industry got me fatigued, this hustle ain't no breeze. Pull out the trio, send the text around Rio. To my shorty mix with half Indian and Rio. Blended like a latte, skin like cappuccino. Apple bottom jeans, back and more action than Tarantino. Curves like a racetrack, you we gotta embrace that. Not to go big and broad fake like a
You can also write single line comments and see. We'll start out with two slashes. I'll be using some of those pieces.
Stepping out the people asking what's good, man. You wanna kill the shit down with the block like
I know you got concerns about what I did. For sure it's hard to learn, but yo, we still kids trying to find a way to grow in each other's eyes. Some days we hurt each other just trying to cover lies. But besides that, I realized back when we began, see, you was my woman, but still my friend, and that meant more to me than I really gave in. Cause that's the kind of love that's simply not a trend.
All these down pieces, they don't impress me. Just another pretty face trying to possess me. Yeah, but baby girl knew me before the fans knew me. She know about the sides of me.
Later on, we'll see
we go
that
to
there are
hot
other
spots,
places
fly
you
like
can import
in the
header files
movies.
from.
I chill like
In this example, the angle brackets
I
say that
can't
we're
complain
using
like
the
it's
standard
fine
header
and dandy.
file.
You're the shorty
If you're
so
interested in
sweet,
finding
man,
out
she got
some
it
more
made.
about
Now
standard
the night
header
was
files,
young, about a
you
quarter
can do a
to one.
Google search
Chilling in
for
the class,
standard
sipping 151.
C headers.
Enjoying the view of all the women in hue.
Standard
White,
C
black,
library.
yellow, red, bone, and blue.
Read a
The
little bit
weakness
more
of a
about
man, and you know it's true. I spit it so hot, but I stay so cool.
Alright, so the next
Back
thing we're
to
gonna
the bar,
do
the cop, another round.
is write
Tip
the
the
main
bartender
function.
and turn right back around.
I know
So
you got
I've got
concerns
main
about
already
what I
declared for
did.
me here.
For sure it's hard to learn,
I'm
but
gonna
yo,
clear
we
out the
still
body
kids
of
trying to
that.
find a way to grow in each other's
Now let's
eyes.
sort of
Some
walk
days we
through
hurt
step
each
by
other
step
just
what we're
trying to cover lies.
So,
But besides that, I
function
realized back
declaration
when we
C
began, see,
starts out
you
with
was
a
my
return
woman,
type.
but still my
So
friend,
we
and
didn't
that
need that
meant
in
more to
Python,
me
but
than I
in C
really
and
gave
Java,
in. Cause
we
that's
have
the
to
kind
say
of
what
love that's simply not a trend.
type of the thing that we're returning from the function. And a main function is always going to return an int, and this is an error code that's returned to a program that might call your program. We won't do much of that in this class, but you see in some uses, like in operating systems, we'll write C programs that can be called from a command line, and we'll get an error code back that can then be used. Now, we're just going to assume that this program is successful, so I'm going to put in a return 0 at the end. And 0 is the code that means that we were successful. Now, main is the name of the function, and then in parentheses after that, I list my parameters. So for this function, I'm going to just delete that. I'm not going to have any parameters. So main doesn't take any arguments, and it returns 0. And now in the body of main, I'm going to call a helper function to print out my table of square roots. So I'm going to call print root table, and I'm going to pass the argument 10 to it. And so inside the body of main, these are really just like the Python statements that we saw in the Python example. We call the print root table function with the argument of 10, and then we return 0. So I'm going to save that. Let's go ahead and declare print root table and see how that's going to work out. So first I'm going to put in the declaration of this function. So I'm going to say void for the return type. We'll talk about that in a second. And then put in its name. And then I'm going to list the formal parameters. And the parameter I want here is going to be called n. And then I'm going to use curly braces to define where the body of this function is. So we've got a few differences from Python here already. I have the name. Well, that's a similarity. But in C, I have to declare the return type. But print root table isn't actually going to return anything. And so there's a special keyword in C, void, which says I'm not actually going to return a value. And then I've got my declaration of the parameter over here. Well, it's called n. And so that n part at the end, that's like we would have in Python. But in C, I have to declare the type of that parameter also. And so I'm going to say that n is going to contain integers, or type int. And by declaring that type, that allows the C compiler to write a more efficient runtime version of this than we would get in a language like Python. So now if we look at our call down in line 18 and compare it to the function declaration up in line 13, in line 18 we're passing 10 as the actual argument. And in line 13, when this gets run, the parameter n will get the value 10 when we run the body of this function. All right, now inside the function, I want to create a loop that'll go through and print out this table of square roots. And to do that in C, I need a loop index variable. And so I'm going to declare a local variable. So this is a local variable. And the local variable is named I, and it's going to store values of type int. And I could just declare it like that if I'm going to assign to it later. Or if I want, I could actually put an assignment here to initialize it right away to make I equal to 0. And then after that, I can write my loop. And my curly braces around it. And I'm going to actually start at 1. And so a loop in C has 3 key parts. This is quite a bit different than a loop in Python. The first part initializes the loop. And it does that by setting I to the value 1. And now the second part of this loop declaration, that tells us what check we should do at the end of the loop to see whether there's more work to be done. And so this check says, if I is less than or equal to n, do the loop one more time. And then after it does the loop, it checks it again. Is I less than or equal to 1? If so, it does it another time. And then the third part here, this I++, that's called an increment statement. And it's executed at the end of every time through the loop. And so the I++ there says, take whatever value I has now and make I have the next value. So if I was 1, I get to the end of the loop, the I++ runs, and I would change from 1 to 2, and so on, until eventually I becomes greater than n, and then the loop will stop. So what's left to do? Well, I need to write actually the code inside the loop to do the printing. And there's a function in C called printf that will do that for us. And we'll go into some detail on how this works later. But for now, I'm just going to use this format string that says give me a 2-digit decimal number, and then give me 7 characters worth of a floating point number. And I want 3 characters after the decimal point. And then I put a \n that says, hey, after you've printed out those 2 numbers, then I want a new line. Write the next stuff in the line after that. And then in printf, after I give that format string, I can give the variables that I want to go into the spots that I defined. And so I can put an I here to say I want to print out the value of I. And then I can call the square root function, and that's going to be in that math header that we imported above to get the square root of I. And then I finish up my parentheses, and I end the line with a semicolon. So that's another difference from Python. In Python, the statement ends with the end of a line. In C, the statement doesn't end until I get to the semicolon. So I could format this differently. I could put the I and the square root on separate lines, and the end of the print doesn't come until I get to the semicolon. In general, we won't do that, but sometimes it's useful if you have a really long line of code. All right, so that should take care of running my loop from 1 up to and including n, and then printing out the value of I and the value of the square root of I at each of those. So if I've done that right, I should be able to save it, and then come over to the Project Explorer, right-click on Square Root, and choose Run As Local C++ Application. And it compiled, and if I go down to the console, I can grab this edge above the console and drag that up so I can see more of the code. And I see that I have the square roots of all the numbers from 1 up to 10.
Okay, we hope you enjoyed writing your first program in C. Until next time, I'm Matt.
And I'm Kurt.
All right, see you next time.